Hello everybody, I'm Nick, and in this video I'm going to show you how you can add Facebook authentication in your ASP.crawl application. For the demonstration purposes, I'm going to use my REST API series as a vessel to implement this feature, but you can use this on any type of ASP.crawl application. But before we dive into the code, I want to make an announcement. Many of you have asked me, what is the IDE I'm using? It is called Rider, and it is made by JetBrains, the same company that made ReSharper. Rider is an amazing, fully cross-platform IDE with ReSharper built into it. The ability to use the exact same IDE in both Windows, Linux, and Mac is a very welcome feature, and as somebody who's writing other languages as well, being able to copy my exact same key bindings to other JetBrains IDEs I use is awesome. Even if you're using it just for C#, I highly recommend Rider. Since I saw that many of you were interested in it, I reached out to JetBrains and they were kind enough to give me 5 free 1-year licenses for Rider. I will be giving those keys away on the 1st of February 2020, and I will be advertising this giveaway in all of my videos leading up to this day. In order to participate, you will find the link in the description taking you to the registration page. You will need to be subscribed to my YouTube channel and have your subscriptions public so you can verify you're subscribed. You will need to have the sub-notification bell turned on, and you will need to leave a comment in my video with hashtag JetBrainsRider. You will find all those instructions in the link in the description down below or on the card on the top right corner of your screen right now. This video is part of my ASP.crawl series. If you don't want to miss any episode, please subscribe and ring the sub-notification bell to get notified when I upload a new episode. So as you can see here, I'm using the Tweetbook project from the REST API series. And if you're not familiar with it, we'll be building a REST API with ASP.crawl from 2 to 3 now for a year now. And it's a pretty feature-rich API. You might want to take a look at it if you're not familiar with it. But what I've done now is I created a simple website which essentially will be used to log in with Facebook to get the token. Because essentially what we want to do is we want to have a login button below the welcome message. Click that button and get the access token which we will use in our REST API. And the way to do that is actually fairly simple. Facebook has made it quite simple for us. And we're going to take you through the whole process. The auth workflow that we're going to go for goes like this. We have our user, me and you, and we use the client-side application, can be a website or a mobile app or anything else client-side. And then the user will essentially click the button saying login with Facebook. And clicking that button will make the user authenticate, and we're going to get back an access token. And the client-side application will send the access token to the server-side API, the .NET Core API in our scenario. And to validate that the token is essentially valid and correct, we're going to call the Facebook Graph API, and we're going to say, first, is this token valid in one call? And then give me information about this token, things like first name, last name, the picture, or the email. And we're going to use the database or some identity service to validate that the user actually exists in our system, or they don't, and we need to register them. So the first thing that you need to do is you need to go to the developers.facebook.com website. And this is where you can essentially create applications and sign up as a developer. And then you're going to go to My Apps and say Create App. And we're going to name this something like YouTube tutorial. But you can name this whatever your application is doing, whatever your business is. And I'm just going to say Create App ID and then just submit it. And now I will create my application. And I will need to use a product called the Facebook Login product. So I'm going to click Setup here. And we are going to set up logging in. As you saw, I have a website to do that, so I'm going to use the Web SDK, but you can use the Android, the iOS, or whatever else you're using. It's the exact same process, it's just that you're going to use a different type of SDK. So I'm going to click Web first, and I'm going to say what my URL is. I'm going to copy just the local host because that's a testing one, and I'm going to say Save, and then I'm going to continue, and then it's going to tell us to set up the SDK for JavaScript. What you need to do is essentially just copy this code and put it in your website, and I'm gonna do that here. This is a simple Razor Pages application. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna say at section, and I'm gonna use the script section, which will allow me to put stuff at the very bottom of the website. Here is where it will be rendered. So we're gonna close that, and I'm just gonna paste whatever code we copied, okay? And then it tells us that we need to replace two things, the app ID and the version. The version, as you can see on the website, it says it's v5.0, and the app ID is this app ID here. So I'm going to click that to copy, and then I'm going to go back to my code and replace the app ID here. and then v5.0 here. And that's all you need to do to set up the SDK on your website. Now let's follow the next step and see what it says. To check the login status, we will have a fb.getLoginStatus method. Now I'm actually going to copy that and I'm going to make my own method in that scripts section. And I'm going to say at the very bottom function, and I'm going to make a JavaScript function called check login state. And in that login state, what I'm going to do is I'm going to call that fb.getLoginStatus. And what I'm going to do with the response is I'm going to essentially set the HTML for an element underneath the welcome message. So down here, I'm going to say create a new div and give that div the ID of status. I will just make this lowercase, and that's it. So what will happen is whenever I'm getting the login status back, I want to set the HTML of that div to be essentially the JSON response. And to do that, I'm just going to use jQuery because it's just here. I don't recommend or not recommend jQuery. It's just something that I can use to set the HTML of a div. And then I'm going to do HTML, and I'm going to say, I'm going to create a code tag to have a little bit of formatting here. And then in that code tag, we're going to say JSON.stringify, and then response, which is what I'm getting back from Facebook, and then null and 2 to have some basic formatting. And that's it. So now when I click a login button, which I'm going to add in a second, depending on my status, this auth status div will be populated with a JSON object, which will give me the access token, which I need to log in or register to anything else. In this case, our REST API. So I'm going to go back here. I'm going to say next. And now, as you can see, this is the check login state method that we essentially wrote, but a bit different here. And then I will copy this login button, and I'm going to put it underneath the welcome message. And this will, as you see on login, check the login state. And the scope of this is public profile and email. This is sort of the minimum we need. We need essentially first name, last name, and the image of the user potentially, and then their email to log them in our API. Once we have that, we can just go back here and say next. And as you can see, we just finished. There's not much else we need here. So to show you what we did, I'm going to stop this and start it again. And I'm going to go back to the website, and I'm going to log in with my own account to get a token. So application is running. If I refresh, you'll see that we have a login button now, a Facebook login button. This means we installed it properly. And if I just click that, you'll see that I'm getting a pop-up here saying YouTube tutorial will receive your name, profile, picture, and email address. And we say, yeah, I'm logged in already. So continue as Nicholas. And what this will do is it will log me in and authenticate me. And as you can see, we have the auth response, and we now got an access token, the expiration, the status as connected, and some signed request and expires in stuff like that. So what I will do is I will copy this token, and there is a link I can hit where I will get some information about this token. And that link is the graph.facebook.com/me, and then the fields I want and the access token. So if I paste that and I click send, you see that I get back my first name, my last name, the picture object, email, and ID. So this is awesome because we can use that token to get back some information for that user who essentially created that token. The problem with that is that nowhere here did we validate that this token was actually issued by our application. Any application, not just the YouTube tutorial one, could issue a token for this user, and the response would be the same, assuming you have access to those fields. So what we need to do as well is we need to verify that this token is actually issued by our application. And in order to do that, we need to use the debug token endpoint, where it takes an input token, in that case, the token we want to verify that is authentic and ours, and also an access token. Now, this access token can be two things. It can either be a valid access token. So if I do something like access token is that token, and then input token is also the same token, because they're both valid, I'm going to get back a response saying that this is a valid token and that it belongs to a user with a specific ID. However, I won't always have a valid access token because my application would need to be authenticating all the time and keeping track of tokens. What I can do instead is on the access token, I can delete that, and I can go and copy the app ID and go back to Postman and put the app ID as the first thing, and then use the pipe symbol. It's this vertical line here, and use that. And then I will need to go to settings and basic and copy this app secret, and I will copy that here, and then I will go here, put it after the pipe, and click send. And as you can see, I'm still getting the response. So now I can verify the input token just using the access token as the app ID and the app secret. Keep in mind the secret is meant to be secret, so do not allow anybody to see what this is. This application will be long gone once you actually see this video, so don't worry about using it. So now we know that we need these two endpoints to essentially first verify the token and then get some information from the user. We can actually dive into writing some code. I'm gonna go to this application and I'm gonna stop the website from running because we now have a token. I might need to reissue that, but that's fine. And I will go to the Tweetbook project. And this is where we will be implementing the iFacebook auth service. So I'm gonna start with that. I'm gonna go to services and create a new interface. And I'm gonna name it iFacebook auth service. And now this service will need essentially two methods. The first one will be returning a Facebook token validation result, and we will call this validate access token async, and this will accept the access token we want to validate. And then the other one will be returning a task of Facebook user info result, and we're going to call that get user info async, again using a string, which is the access token. So we need to create those objects. And how will they look? Well, we know how they will look because we have the responses here. So what I like to do when I don't want to just hand code all that is I use an online service that accepts a JSON object and returns back a C# class. So let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to just type essentially JSON to C#, and I'm going to go on the QuickType.io. So I'm going to open QuickType and I'm going to paste my object here. And what I'm getting back is Facebook user info result, essentially the whole thing. And as you can see, it actually generates all the C# for me. So I'm going to copy the name, create the class, and I'm going to do that. I could potentially have a new folder called external contracts or something like that. Let's just call it external. And then in it, make a folder called contracts. And in here, we're going to create our Facebook user info result. And I'm going to go back and copy that. I need to rename a few things, namely the data is actually Facebook picture data, but let's just copy it and we'll fix it once we copy it. So I'm going to paste that here and I'm going to import all the statements. And this is not picture, this is Facebook picture. Yes, rename that. And if you want to use it, you can use it. Let's just delete the partial classes. We don't really need them. And then we need to say that this is not data, that this is Facebook picture data. And that's it. We now have the response for one of the things we want back. And the other one is this response over here. So I'm going to, again, copy that, go back here, put it here, see what's the name I wanted, token validation. Yeah, go back to the website, use that, and then make the class. You could, of course, make it by hand, but I just didn't want to do that to save some time. And it automatically adds the JSON property attribute, so there's no reason not to use it. It will be what I would do anyway. And then the data is, well, remove the partials, and the data is token validation data. So let's name it that. And that's it. We have everything we need now, all the responses. So what we need to do is essentially create a service that implements these two interfaces. And the way to do that is just to use an HTTP client to do the GET requests required to that endpoint. So I'm going to go back to the services. Let me just copy the name. And I'm going to say add a new Facebook auth service. And this will be implementing the Facebook auth service interface. And let's go ahead and implement the missing members, the two methods. So we are going to have two URLs we're going to use. We have a private const string called token validation URL. And this will be what we're going to call to validate the token, the debug one. And then we're going to have another one called user info URL. And then I'm going to put that here. And let's go ahead and copy the endpoints. This is the validation one, the debug token. And I will need to clear it a bit. We're going to tokenize it. So we can do a string format. So what it will look like is this. We have the debug token one where we need the input token, which is the access token, and then app ID and app secret. And then we have the user info URL, which is the me one. And I'm going to go ahead and paste that here. And that only has one token. Now, if you wanted different fields, you need to change the scope of the token issuing in order to access more information. But this is all the basic ones we will need. So I'm going to keep it very, very simple. If you need more, you can have more. And now we have the two URLs. And of course, we also going to have a settings object, a private read-only Facebook auth settings object. And we're going to inject that through the constructor. And I'm going to go ahead and create it in the options folder. And all this will do is it will have two properties, both strings, the app ID and the app secret is the other one. Now, since this is a secret, I highly recommend you use something like Azure Key Vault or some secret management service. Don't have this as just plain text, but if you have your connection string as plain text, I guess it's the same thing. So we have that now, and I'm gonna go ahead and import that. And then we will add the private read-only IHTTP client factory, and we're going to use that client factory, which is a .NET Core feature, to create HTTP clients for this service. So that's all we're going to need for this. Now, there will be some dependency injection we need to register in a second, but we're going to do that once we implement the methods. Now, the first method, actually both methods are pretty similar. You will have a formatted URL, which is a string.format, in this scenario on the token validation URL. And then we need the access token as the parameter. And we also need the auth settings app ID, and then the auth settings dot app secret. And that gives us the full URL. And then we need the result, which is await dot client factory dot create client dot get async. And then we're going to use the formatted URL to call to get that back. Of course, I will make the method async in order to use await. And now I can just say result.ensure success status code. If it's not success, it will throw an exception. You might want to have some exception handling here in your scenario. I'm just going to say essentially throw if this is not 200. And then response as string in order to pass essentially the response from the result. So content dot read as string async, and we're going to return JSON convert dot deserialize object async as a Facebook token validation result from the response as string. So this is all our method will do. And now the other method actually looks a lot similar to that. So I could technically just extract the whole thing. Let's just copy paste for now. We might want to refactor that later. I'm not going to do that now. And now we're not going to format that. We're still going to use the access token, but we want to use the user info URL to get the info of the user. And again, we use the exact same code to do that, but we're returning a Facebook user info result. And in terms of methods that we need to use to call Facebook to do the token handling, that's all we need, this class here. So we can go ahead now and create our dependency injection installation for Facebook services. I'm going to make a Facebook auth installer here. And I'm going to say installer If you're not familiar with how we're doing this installation here, I highly recommend you check the 3rd episode of my REST API series. I explain why I'm doing this, but this will essentially register our service. And we need to get the settings. So I'm gonna make a new Facebook, not installer, Facebook auth settings object. And then I'm gonna do configuration dot bind, and I'm gonna use the name of the settings. And then the Facebook auth settings object, and then services dot add singleton, and I'm gonna use the Facebook auth settings. So what this will do is the bind method will find a section called Facebook auth settings in our app.settings, and will bind the JSON object to this C# class. We also need to say services.add HTTP client, and also services.add singleton Facebook auth service, Facebook auth service. We could make this add HTTP client more specific using a named client. I'm not going to do that because that's the only one we have across the whole application. Now, since we did this, it's a good time to go to the app settings.json file and create that section. And how are the settings looking? Let's go into the class. I'm going to copy that. I'm going to say, maybe here, Facebook auth settings. And the first thing we need is the app ID. And the second thing we need is the app secret. So I'm going to put that here. And now I'm going to copy them, not from here, from this endpoint. So the app ID is that. Paste it here. And then the app secret is that. Paste it here. And that's all we need to configure that. So now we have all the Facebook configuration already done. The other thing we need to do is essentially create the endpoint and create a method for that registration and login. Now, whenever you essentially do a login or sign up on a website using some sort of social media, you might see that they have a single method for both sign up and login. That's because the first time you sign up, they will just register you, but also log you in. But if you're already a member of the website, they will essentially just log you in without registering you. So we're going to do the same thing. We're just going to have a login with Facebook endpoint, and we're going to use that to do both registration and login. You can, of course, split it, but the logic will be roughly the same anyway. So what we need is we need to go to the identity service interface, and we need to add another method here. And it will look something like this: task authentication result. So we're going to still return our own JOT token and refresh token. And we're going to say login with Facebook async. And all this takes is an access token. And this is the access token that the client side, in our scenario, that little website I showed you, this one here, will be supplying to your API, calling the API. So let's go ahead and implement that in the derived class, which is here. Let me just minimize these methods a little bit. They're a bit big, they could be smaller. So we need to implement that. I'm going to make this async because we're definitely going to need that. And the logic in that method goes something like this. We first need to validate the token. So I'm going to say validated token result equals to await. And we need to inject the Facebook service here. So I'm going to say private read-only Facebook auth service. And I'm going to inject it from the constructor using riders key binding. And then I'm going to say validate access token, which is the access token being supplied by the user. And now with that here, I can say if validation token result dot data dot is valid is false. So if it's not valid, then we're going to return a new authentication result, which has a single error in it called invalid Facebook token. Now, of course, you might not want to make specific in a realistic scenario what went wrong here and potentially just have a code that your application understands. But just for clarity, I'm explaining what each scenario can return, but it's not a great practice in general. So now that we are saying that if the token is invalid, return, then we can get the user info from Facebook. So we can say var user info equals await the Facebook auth service and then get user info using the access token. And then we're gonna try to see if this user actually has registered with us before. So user manager dot find by email async using the user info dot email address from Facebook. And if the user is null, then this means that they're not registered and we're gonna register them now. Else we already have this user registered and we're gonna generate a token for that. So the else logic, if you're already logged in, is actually very, very simple. You just say await generate authentication result for user async, and we use the user object we just retrieved to generate it. And the method, the generate token method is here. You can find that in the description down below. I'm not gonna go through how we generate JOT tokens again. So if the user is null, we're gonna register them. So this is where this logic goes. And we're gonna say identity user equals new identity user, which is the object I'm using for my users. It's a default object. And I'm gonna say ID equals GUID.newGUID.toString. And then email equals userinfo.email from Facebook. And then username, I'm gonna set it the same as the email, like we do for the other users in this application. And now we have the identity user from the Facebook user that our system recognizes. And we're gonna do var created result because we're gonna create the user programmatically. I'm gonna say create async identity user. Now you might have noticed that I didn't use a password for this. That's because this will be a passwordless user, meaning there's no way to actually log in using a password. You can only log in using Facebook. If you want to treat this differently and prompt the user to have a password as well, of course you can do that, and the create user has overloads for things like passwords, as you can see here, but I'm gonna use the passwordless one. And then if the create result did not succeed, then we're gonna say return new authentication result. Essentially the same thing. Let me just copy that. And we're gonna be vague. We're gonna say something went wrong. Now we don't know what went wrong. We could see what went wrong using the created result.errors object, but I don't want to leak to the user what went wrong. And then the last thing is exactly the same as this one. Generate the authentication result using the identity user object here. And that's it for this method. We have a method now to create or log in a user using Facebook. So what's left is to go on our controllers that can be found in the controllers folder, v1 identity controller, and I'm gonna create an endpoint for Facebook. And I'm just gonna copy the, not the refresh one, the login one, because it will look pretty much the same, just calling other things. So let me just change that. It's not a user login request. It's more of a string.access token. And in fact, I might as well just make an object for it, make a contract. So let's go to the contracts, v1 requests, and then in here I'm gonna say user Facebook auth request. Yeah, that's enough. And then say string access token here. So we have that now, and I will use that here. So let's just name this again request, and this is the user Facebook auth request. And then the identity service, we're just gonna call the login with Facebook, and we're gonna use result.access token to register or login, and the rest of the code actually stays exactly the same because our method still returns an authentication result, and that's it. So now we need to just change the URL. So instead of login, I'm gonna create a new one. I'm gonna say just Facebook auth, and then potentially just auth FUBU or Facebook. And I'm gonna change that, and then I'm gonna say as well Facebook auth here. And that's all we need to do. So now I'm gonna run this website in the background. So this is now running, and I'm also gonna run the API. So I'm gonna debug that. And this should also launch Swagger. And in order to see exactly what's going on, I'm gonna put a breakpoint here. I'm gonna take you through the whole journey. So let's just go to Swagger. And as you can see, we now have the auth with Facebook, and I'm gonna click that. And I'm gonna say try it out. And as you can see, we need an access token. So let me refresh that page. Okay, so this imagine being your application, your website, your iOS, your anything. And then you just click login, automatically logs me in, gives me a new valid token. I'm copying that token. In your code, you will be doing this programmatically. And I'm gonna use that to call the API here. So I'm gonna execute this, and I'm gonna go and see that I hit a breakpoint, and my request object has the access token. So let's go. We're gonna go in the identity service. Let me make this a bit bigger. And we have the access token. And the first thing we need to do is validate it on Facebook, and this will format the URL, call Facebook. And as you can see, it returns that the token is indeed valid and it expires at a specific time. We don't really need to care about the expiration, because if it was valid once, it is still user authorized, but once in a while you might want to force the user to do it again for security purposes. Now, since it is valid, we're not going to go in here, and we're going to get the user info, and this is the call to Facebook again. And as you can see, I'm getting my email back, my user ID, my Facebook picture, everything is coming back. And then I'm going to see if the user actually exists in the system. The user is null, meaning it's not in the system. So this will essentially create a new me. And you can see that it's called just succeeded in the result, meaning it registered me in the website. And I'm just going to generate a new token and return here. So in the front end, you can see that the response has a token and a refresh token, meaning I was successful into registering with Facebook. And if I go to jot.ms, I can just put the token and see that it is as valid as any other token we generated. We have a email, we have the JWT ID, my email here again, expiration and all that, and the user ID. And of course, if I call the same endpoint again with the same access token, because I am now registered in the system, as you can see in the method, I'm still validating and all that, but the user call to the identity service will return that I am actually a registered user. So it's gonna go just to the generate authentication result for user, and I'm gonna get the token back again with a new token. So that's all very simple, very easy. You will find the code for this in the description down below. Don't forget to register for the JetBrains Rider giveaway. Special thanks to my GitHub sponsors for making these videos possible. If you want to support me as well, you're going to find the link in the description down below. Leave a like if you like this video, subscribe for more content like this, and ring the bell as well to get notified when I upload a new episode. And I'll see you in the next video. Keep coding.